Ladies, gentlemen, everything in between. Today, we have the true privilege of welcoming a trailblazer in our community, a woman uplifter, the luminous personality behind Vogue Mexico, at the helm of it all, someone who, beyond curating trends, has completely broken cultural barriers and set an example for women, Latinas everywhere. It is a huge honor of mine to welcome Karla Martinez de Salas, somebody I feel so lucky to know. Thank you so much, Karla, for being
Karla,
here with us.
welcome. Hi, ladies. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be in the space, in the box.
Do you feel the anti-gravity yet?
I do. I don't know what I feel. I feel like I've been on like 5 planes in the past couple of days, so...
You probably have.
Yeah, it feels like just another airline
5 planes
somewhere.
and a marathon.
No,
right? You're working through your leg cramps.
Yeah.
It's not enough that she's creating trends and breaking barriers in the fashion industry. I ask myself all the time, I'm like, how many hours in a day does Beyonce have? But ever since I met you now, I also ask myself, Karla can do marathons and she can eat the way she eats and wake up the way she wakes up and does the thing that she does, runs 2 magazines. I can do it.
Yeah, and then I miss flights, go to wrong airports, you know.
Do you really?
Yeah.
You
that
can't
was
win 'em
actually
all.
one of my questions
I
for
did
you.
that on Saturday. We can talk about that.
Okay, well, that's a great place to start. You do wear many, many hats, both figuratively and literally. No, but how do you balance, your responsibilities, being creative, being healthy, and how do you make it all happen? What's your secret?
Oh, goodness. Well, I feel like I've always been... I'm definitely would not call myself type A. I try my hardest to make lists on my phone or on a notebook, but I'm kind of like, the list is like this versus down. And it's funny, I'm married to someone who's completely the opposite. So I think that really helps.
Yeah.
But breathing, I wake up, I try and, because I am traveling so much and because I do have a lot on my plate, I try and take like an hour to exercise in the morning and kind of clear my mind before I start the day. That has not happened the past couple of days just because, as you said, I just ran a marathon, so I'm tired. But it's hard. I can't say that it comes out right every time. I think I kind of improvise.
Yeah.
I'm very good at solving problems. Right now, I've been traveling for 10 days. My mom is with my kids, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And that brings me a lot of peace because they love being with her. So like if she's there, I don't worry about that part, which is 90% of stress
Your worries, right?
for me. So I kind of just take everything as it goes. I have a great team in Mexico that works with me. So I feel like the magazine part seems to be easy. It's just like, there's some weeks, I don't know if you guys feel them too. Like, for example, we did the Vogue shoot and it's like, okay, you got to travel, you got to get to the shoot, then the shoot. And it's like on Monday, you're like, okay, I just have to get through the week.
Yeah.
And how am I going to get through the week? Kind of taking it
Day
step
by day.
by step and day by day. I think that's the only way to survive, right?
Yeah.
I think we know what to do on paper. We know what works. It's the executing it that's hard. And from what I've noticed, a lot of very successful and creative people, they do find the time to exercise and breathe and do those other things so that it feeds the engine. Like what you put in your body, food and sleep and things like that.
Yeah, I will say I went to a health clinic with my sister in Germany at the end of the summer that I had been dying to go to in Germany, and I haven't drank anything. And not that I'm a pretty moderate drinker, I would say, even though I don't know what moderate means anymore.
Nowadays.
But I haven't drank for more than a month, and that has been super helpful.
Yeah.
Like just staying like focused, not being even if
Clear.
you go to bed at 1
Yeah.
and you're out at a party and you need to wake up at 7,
You're good.
not having something to drink is really helpful.
Yeah.
Another thing that people say, I don't do it, but I was listening to the Vogue podcast with Anna Wintour, and she was saying she wakes up at 5, and I'm like, I just can't wake up.
Wait, you don't wake up at 5?
There's a whole day
I swore
stuffed in
you
the
did.
morning.
And it's annoying because right now Mexico's 2 hours behind the East Coast.
Right.
Which if you wake up at 7, you have like a barrage of emails.
Yeah.
So speaking of balance, like if I'm in Mexico and my husband gets home at 8:30 at night. I don't want to be like, hey, half an hour, peace out. I'm going to bed at 9 because I have to be up at 5.
Hey, how are you, bud?
It's like, put the kids to sleep, get home, have dinner, put the kids to sleep, have like your TV time, just like time to like
unwind,
sit in bed and do nothing or read a book. And then your husband comes home, you have to talk to him, or your partner comes home. You know what I mean? Like, you have to say something.
She's like, I missed that part in the manual of marriage. You have to talk to them.
So I feel like it's hard to go to bed super early.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. For me too, especially because I think of everything I could be doing. I'm like, gosh, if I just pushed it one more hour.
Yeah.
And I really admire how you do it because at least from the outside, it seems like you're hitting the big three. You got family, you got work, and you got health, yourself. I'm like, ugh. And then on top of that, you're just a mover and a shaker. So I wanna talk a little bit about, for those of us that don't know, or those of you who haven't heard, your Yalitza Aparicio cover, which I'm sure you're exhausted talking about, but it's just incredible because that cover changed. I think not just how we in the community saw ourselves represented in the media in general, but just broke past the glass ceiling as far as what we can look at as fashion and what we can look at as beauty. So I think it's incredible, and I would love if you could share just a little preview of how that kind of came to be.
I would love talking about this because I, as you said, I think I really say that there was a before and after, especially in Mexico, as far as like beauty standards. I think, for those of us that grew up in the US with Latino parents, like if you ever went back to your parents' countries, like Mexico, Cuba, what the things you would kind of, at least in Mexico, the things that people, you'd watch the soap operas and the white girl was kind of the beautiful girl, the girl that everyone aspired to be. And the brown girl was always like la amiga fea or the housekeeper. There were never any like roles that that were aspirational. And I feel like, and even when I moved there, like even I grew up going to Mexico my whole life with my parents, going to Juarez. We lived across the border, and everyone would be like, "What'd you bring from the U.S.? What'd you bring from the U.S.?" And everything that came from the U.S. or that came from Europe was better. So beauty, fashion, food, everything, right? And I remember when I first started the magazine, I would say, oh, let's do, I don't know, Shakira. And my boss at the time would be like, oh, she's not very Vogue. And I'm like, but what is what does that mean? And what does that mean in 2016?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what is a Vogue cover? So I remember I met Alfonso Cuarón in Berlin in like 2018 at this Rolex fair, like this mentors and proteges thing where they would have like a mentor and then their protege that like worked with them for a year. It was actually a really amazing program. Yeah. And it was like architecture, film, etc. And he's like, well, I have a really big project coming out on Netflix. It was like one of the first movies that they released on the platform. And I remember being in New York and one of the girls from my office said, oh, let's do Yalitza for the cover. They're offering her. And I was like, well, who's Yalitza? How are we going to put like someone whose name we don't even know, we've never heard of on the cover? Like, it's not going to sell any magazines. I think because I was the daughter of Mexican immigrants and my dad was, Moreno and my mom not some more fair like me, but I never for 1 minute said like, she's an indigenous woman, she can't be on the cover. On the contrary, like to me, we grew up in the States. Right. You can be whatever you want, right? You can be on the cover, you can be a doctor, you can be whatever you want, an actor, actress. And so she said to me, well, should we look into it? I was like, yeah, let's figure out what to do. I just don't know if I can put someone who nobody knows on the cover.
Right.
And I went to New York and I told a former colleague and she said to me, oh, you would never put Yalitza on the cover.
Right, like that's not Vogue.
Yeah. And I was like, well, what does she mean? And so, but then I knew what she meant. Yeah. I knew that she's like, or you put her with the other girl that's in the movie, the blonde one, right? Or the light-skinned one. And I was like, you know what? We have to do this. We have to put her on the cover. And so I called Regina, who I worked with, and I was like, put an exclusive on her. We have to shoot her. So we developed the idea. We got an all-Mexican crew to do it. Dior had just done the show in France.
I love that about
inspired by Escaramuzas. And we shot the cover and she wore Dior, and we released it we released the first article about the movie on November 7th, and I was home on a Friday night. Yeah.
Yeah, girl.
Yeah, girl.
Looking at my Instagram, and it was like 50,000, like 60,000, like
Yeah, amazing.
just people were so excited. And I was like, okay, in a month, this is going to be insane. And it was really like explosive. Like my only thing, I know you're not supposed to regret anything, but my boss at the time was like, you don't put her on the cover of Latin America because she's very Mexican. And like, they're going to say like, why isn't there an indigenous Colombian woman on the cover? Which in hindsight was a dumb decision because there were indigenous people from Australia that thanked us for that cover.
Yeah.
Like it really did something, not just for Mexicans, but for indigenous women all over the world.
Yeah.
And so I think it really broke those barriers, and it was a really exciting time, and it really changed people's perceptions of beauty.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. And thank you. I mean, I can't imagine in that position, you had just become editor-in-chief in Vogue like a year prior.
I had been there for a year, and my boss did say to me, I hope you have a plan B. And I was like, there is no plan B. This is it.
Ballsy.
You
There's
stuck
a
to
plan
Ballsy
A.
women.
But that's how you get
That's it.
where
There's
you
no other
are.
cover, you know? And it was I don't think I was ever scared. I just had no idea how
Powerful.
powerful it was going to be.
When we were growing up, and you know, we're about to be 30, we're still really young. Representation, even in American media, for certain groups of people, you know, homosexuals,
Any person of color, too.
any person of color, indigenous people, you're absolutely right about the roles that they did have. You know, we're almost like demeaning in a way. And then when there was one role, it was like, oh my gosh, look at this one, you know, shining beacon that we can hold on to. But you said a quote, correct me if I'm wrong, but about the power of realizing that, taking back the power of being the only Latina in a room or the only Latino in a room, that people can see it in an intimidating way, but you kind of turned it around and saying, no, that's a powerful thing. That's something that we can use to show more of this. And like Gemma and I both said when you were telling the story, your authenticity, doesn't matter who it is that you're shooting. I feel like you find something that's super authentic about their heritage or about who they are, and you put it at the front. I can tell you from experience because I walked into our shoot wearing my clothes. Just my clothes, like a Cuba tank top that was my mom's and jeans of hers from the 80s that fit me perfect.
The Levi's?
Yeah, because they were tailored to her body, and we're both like, you know,
The same.
Tiny.
And you're like, you know what? We need to capture this. Like, this is a moment right here. And I'm like, but this is my clothes. And you're like, yeah, but it's real. It's the clothes has a story, and I think that's really, really amazing about you. My question after my whole word vomit of that is, where's the line of how far do you go before you fight while you're fighting against institutions, bosses, society? How do you balance that line of fighting for what you know is right, but also realizing that you have to face an army, you know?
You know, I think it's just kind of, choosing your battles, right? And I feel like these are the ones that you need to take risks on. Like, you know, we did a cover also with a mushe from the state of Oaxaca. Mushes are the third gender in Mexico, which my mom was like, "Qué bonita mujer." I'm like, "Mamá no es mujer, she's a mushe," and it's the third gender that's very widely accepted in Oaxaca. It's a very
Like two-sex people
Oaxacan culture.
Yeah.
They have it in Hawaiian culture too.
And it's really interesting because no one even knew that this third gender existed in Mexico. And I remember they said, put it on the second cover. It made Time magazine, and it was on the second cover, and it should have been on the first cover.
Look at that.
And so I feel like there's some things that, you know, I think are always super important. And to be honest, I have always been very much supported in the decisions that we've taken.
Great.
And I think that's so important to have that support. Maybe like the comment of like, have this, but I'm like, no, we don't have, there is no alternate. This is it. And I think those are the things that I think have been really worth, and I always have you know, this is the reason why we're doing this, and this is the reason why you should support it.
Yeah.
And I think all those decisions that we've made have really paid off. But as you said, you know, I think it really has to be in an authentic way.
Yeah.
I think, you know, there's pictures everywhere, right? There's how many pictures have you seen of your mom? How many pictures do you see of you guys? Like now everyone's a photographer, everyone's making content. So the way we approach, I like the example that you gave of like that capturing you in your moment, because that's the essence that we want to create, right? Like I feel like in the day where you're just like scrolling and scrolling, you need to like look at images and say, like the way, at least, well, I'm much older than you guys, but the way you would kind of tear it out of the magazine,
Yeah,
right?
we did that. Yeah,
and like
we still did that.
this is an image that you'll forever remember. I think that's the important thing. So not only are we like want to say, okay, Yalitza, go, but how do we want to portray her? You know? And I think for me, I don't like when clothes wears people.
Yes.
In real
you've told
life
me
and
this.
in magazines.
Yeah.
I need you to feel comfortable.
And that has to do with your vibe too.
Yeah. Like I didn't, you know, want to make you wear anything that you didn't like, because then you're like,
yeah,
you know, and
comes
so-
off in your attitude.
Exactly. So I feel like that's like one of the most important things to me.
I felt badass. Y'all killed it. Both
You
of y'all.
guys look badass.
They really did. That was an incredible,
Let's do
memorable,
it again.
magical day. For those of you who didn't know, we're talking about the Vogue shoot for Mexico that Karla directed, that Em and her mom were on, which was phenomenal, gorgeous, shot on film. If you haven't seen it, by Alexander
Jem,
Salas.
hello, you were a part of it as
I
well.
was a very lucky person in the room. I was just lucky to be anywhere near that place. So
It was a beautiful experience.
It was really exciting. And I feel like I always love capturing those moments of like mom and daughter, you know? And I always say that like, I remember growing up in Memphis. I think I told your mom this. I remember growing up in Memphis. We're talking about representation. And my dad was a doctor, and him and my mom
surgeon, right?
moved over from Mexico, like for him to do his residency. We lived in Florida, then in Memphis. 1980s, no Mexicans.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
my
what's the
sister and I were the
population?
only ones in the entire school, and not that we ever were discriminated against. We were kind of like the special girls,
Right.
in a way. And my mom was like the Spanish teacher, and everything was, you know, very like.
Let's be real. If you looked a different way, maybe that might have been a different experience.
Yeah,
for you.
exactly.
You know?
Maybe if I was a little darker,
Right.
but I never had like a bad experience.
Yeah.
But there weren't that many Mexicans there. I mean, there were no Mexicans. And so it was really interesting, or not interesting, but it was very powerful to hear the conga. And like, oh my God, people are singing a song in Spanish, and I understand it. And we're sharing that
culture.
Right.
culture.
Yeah.
And that was like, there was a woman named Gloria Estefan that was like top of the charts.
And they had to fight their own fight.
Exactly.
Because they didn't
But they
want
made it
them.
look easy, and it
Well,
probably wasn't.
No.
Right?
Not from what I heard. I wasn't around. I was half,
you were-
half
You were-
in my
you were just an
dad's
egg.
testicles, half in my mom's ovary.
But the fact that made me really excited when I was younger, just one thing that changed the way you heard music.
Yeah.
And that made you feel like there are Latinas in the US killing it.
How full circle that as a child you were inspired by her, and now us we're inspired by you.
Yeah.
And here you are.
It was like when I met her, I was like, this is really exciting, because this changed so much when I was younger.
Yeah.
You know?
You're somebody who's really proud of that, like living in the hyphen, something else I admire about you and something that I relate to. You're not just Mexican. You're not just American. There's a saying now that people are saying, which is like, we're the 200%.
Yeah.
We're not 50
Yeah, I
of this or
love
50 of that. And can you speak a little bit about how that's influenced sort of the trajectory of your career? I mean, other than the obvious.
You know, I think growing up, and I don't know if you guys felt the same way in Miami, because Miami is obviously like a bigger city than El Paso was, but El Paso is very bicultural. So like, if you don't speak Spanish, you are like
Especially
kind of the odd
here.
man
Yeah,
out, right?
here too.
Same here. But when I did move to New York and work in fashion, I have to say that like a lot of the Latinos, we were just kind of like going with the flow. We wanted to make sure that we didn't stand out, that we weren't making too much noise, that we could work just as hard. We weren't saying like, you know, being so vocal about like, here I am, you know, like we'd say, hi, mira, you're Mexican or you're Colombian or what have you. You know, I feel like that was something that probably as Latinos, our parents kind of taught us just go, you know, assimilate and be, you know, at least my parents were very much, yes, assimilate, but keep your culture, keep your values.
Did they, because I know that you fell in love with fashion from really early on, right? Like you used to play with clothes and whatnot. And did you feel like certain things were unattainable to you? Because your parents, they supported your creativity, right?
Yeah, they supported it, but they weren't sure, like, what does working in fashion, what does that mean? You know, and growing up, it was like you either worked in a store, you know, at the mall, or you became a fashion designer. And like, you didn't know about the endless other careers that you could have.
Did you dream?
I dreamt, I was like, okay, what am I going to do this summer? That was in college. And my friend was like, I'm interning at Nicole Miller. My mom got me the internship. And I was like, oh my God, what? My dad's not going to get me anything. He doesn't know anyone. So I like started calling magazines and someone picked up the phone. That's why I believe in answering people back when they message you, DM, whatever. This girl was like, oh, you go to school in Tucson? I'm from Tucson. Come up for an interview. And I like went up for an interview and I got the internship. It was like with Alberta Ferretti and Jean-Paul Gaultier Moschino, like that group.
Wow.
And that was like the first time that I had like actual fashion. I live in New York City. I was 19. It was like the best summer of my life. You know, it was like, oh my God, like I'm here, you know? And that's when I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. And I always say this because New York's a really expensive city. And like my dad was a doctor and like we were, I would say, upper middle class for El Paso. In New York, we were probably like middle class, right? Like everything's relative.
Yeah.
But I will say, I mean, I had the privilege that my dad was able to like pay rent for me for 2 months to like live in like a, you know, mice infested apartment with my friend. But like,
still, so many people didn't have that.
So many people
access.
don't have that. So many people that don't live in the city that before, you know, when you were interviewing for jobs, you were only interviewing people from like Manhattan or maybe Brooklyn, and like, because it's hard to live in those cities. It's expensive. So obviously you're going to get people that have access to living there, you know? And so I feel like now I'm happy that like companies are going out and saying, okay, we need to hire more Latinos. We need to hire more Black people. We need to hire like, and really make an effort, because if you stick to that pool, you're gonna get the same type of person, right?
Launching.